Alright, hello party people. So tonight we're doing a Terra Nova Tuesday with a supernatural twist. We're going to delve into some of the folklore of this fine island and look at there it is, the Black Stag of St. Bride's. So I'll go through this and then give you my thoughts. So this is from Robert Hiscock, oops, written by Robert Hiscock, and this comes to you via productofnewfoundland.ca. So the Black Stag of St. Bride's. It was 1804, and Thomas Conway's life was governed by the seasons. There was a different job every month. Though he was a young man, he had earned a reputation among his neighbors in St. Bride's as a hard worker. He had to be, if he hoped to provide for his growing family. His wife Emily was pregnant, and he was determined his child would want for nothing. So Thomas fished, planted, cut firewood, and hunted as the seasons allowed. Of all his duties, hunting was his favorite. It didn't seem like work at all. He was a good shot, and fox, partridge, and caribou were plentiful. Rarely did he emerge from the woods without furs and fresh meat. I will give you a little bit of historical context. I believe they say up here it's 1804. Yes, that was about 100 years before moose were introduced to Newfoundland. And see here, this is the area St. Bride's is in. I'll actually move out and let you have a bit of a better view. So right here, which is on the southwestern tip of the Avalon Peninsula, and of course we see the lovely island of Newfoundland right here, and St. Pierre and Miquelon, the French possessions down there, and town. A winter's journey. It was a beautiful winter day in St. Bride's. The sky was blue and the snow crunched cleanly underfoot. Thomas would have liked nothing better than to spend the day in the woods. It was perfect weather for cutting and hauling firewood, but today he had other plans. He was going to deliver winter provisions to his father in Point Lance, some 20 kilometers away. Another little historical note, Newfoundland would not have been measuring in kilometers at this point either, because this predates metric system. More likely we would have measured in hours, as we generally still do these days. Excuse me. Thomas readied his pony and sled, threw his gun over his shoulder, and set out. Fresh, unblemished snow covered the trail. Thomas wondered how long it had been since anyone had passed this way. Maybe a while. Winter was not the time for a long cross-country journey if it could be avoided. There were too many hazards, and the weather was too unforgiving. Newfoundland weather does tend to be rapidly changeable. Lost in thought, Thomas rounded a bend. There, barely a stone's throw away, in a clearing on the edge of the road, was an impressive caribou. A black stag. He'd almost missed it. I don't know who did the art for these. Well, this one comes from Pinterest. Excuse me. So the black stag. The pony halted immediately, flattening her ears. Instinctively, Thomas reached for his gun. This was too good an opportunity to miss. A chance for fresh meat in the dead of winter was never to be squandered. He raised the gun and took aim. With the stag so close, he could not miss. He fired. The sound of the shot reverberated through trees, but nothing happened. He was sure he'd struck the stag, but the animal just stood there, uninjured and unconcerned. He couldn't believe it. Not since he was a boy had he missed such an easy shot. Fortunately, the animal hadn't bolted. Thomas hastily reloaded his gun and shot again. Once more he was sure he'd hit it, but all evidence was to the contrary. I should point out another historical point here. This is 1804. Most likely he was using a muzzle loader. Thomas hastily reloaded his gun and shot again. Now that's 3 times he's fired at this stag. Once more he was sure he'd hit it, but all evidence was to the contrary. It hardly made sense. If nothing else, the stag should have been spooked, but it didn't appear the least bit concerned. The darkly beautiful animal remained in the clearing. So, for the 3rd time, Thomas loaded the gun. He took 2 slow strides toward the stag, carefully aimed, and fired. He could not have missed. As he lowered the gun, Thomas kept his eyes on the animal. He waited for it to stumble, to fall to the snow. Instead, the stag slowly turned its head and gazed toward him. It had a look in its eye like Thomas had never seen. He couldn't explain it. It was as if the animal could see right through him. The hair stood up on his neck. The shadows seemed to spill from the forest. Darkness surged like a wave across the white of the snow. Everything vanished. Everything but the stag and its horrible eyes. The only sound was the pounding of his heart. He needed to leave. He had to put as much space between himself and the clearing as possible. Not wanting to provoke the stag, Thomas backed carefully toward the sled. As soon as the reins, and I will point out here, Mr. Hiscock, if you ever need a proofreader, do consider me. As soon as the reins were in his hands, the pony took off, as if she too were eager to leave this place. Faster and faster she galloped. They soared down the snowy road until the houses of Point Lance came into view. Bad powder. As Thomas pulled up outside his father's house, a group of men, mostly friends from Point Lance, came to greet him. As they helped unload the sled, Thomas told them of the stag, how close he was to it, and how it seemed immune to his shots. He didn't even try to explain how he felt when the stag looked at him. He knew he could never find the words. Still, the men could see that he was troubled. They tried to lighten his mood. They teased him about his marksmanship. They said maybe his hunting days were past him. His father, trusting his son's aim, said the gunpowder must have gotten damp. He might be right, thought Thomas. The story didn't make much sense. Still, his father hadn't seen the look in the stag's eyes. Short days and long nights. Winter days are short in Newfoundland, and the nights are long and dark. If Thomas hoped to travel home in daylight, he had no time to linger in Point Lance. The sun was already low in the sky. The pony trotted along the road to St. Bride's easily enough. Perhaps not as fast as usual, but that was understandable. She'd had little time to rest from her run earlier in the day. By the time they approached the clearing, the place where he'd seen the stag, it was dark. He could feel his apprehension growing. It was as if he were being watched, as if from every gap in the trees there might be eyes looking at him. His heart was racing. He wanted to get back to St. Bride's as fast as possible. He wanted to fly past the clearing, but the pony seemed to be losing steam. He urged her forward, but it was useless. She came to a stop. The clearing was dead ahead. Through the darkness, he couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. The pony tossed her head back, her eyes wide, her nostrils flared. She stomped at the snow underfoot. Again he urged her forward, but she wouldn't budge. Thomas reached for his gun and powder horn. Then it happened. Back in St. Bride's. It was long after dark, and there was still no sign of Thomas. Emily peered from the kitchen window, hoping for some sign of her husband. It wasn't like Thomas to be so late. She checked the supper she'd been warming on the stove when, from the corner of her eye, she caught sight of some motion. It was the pony. The animal was running straight for the house. It came to a stop right outside the door. She flew through the open door. The animal looked exhausted. Its harness was broken, and the sled was missing. Worst of all, there was no sign of Thomas. At dawn, the people of St. Bride's began a search. I will point out, historically speaking, the likelihood of anyone having a flashlight was pretty much zero. And if anyone did, they were probably time travelers. At dawn, the people of St. Bride's began a search. They followed the road toward Point Lance until they came to a clearing. There, on the road, they found Thomas dead. His body had fallen across the sled. The contents of his powder horn were spilled across his face. The snow around the sled was undisturbed, and there was no sign of a struggle. Thomas seemed completely uninjured. What exactly happened to Thomas was a mystery. As word of his death traveled, the men of Point Lance remembered the tale of the black stag Thomas had told and how apprehensive he had seemed about the animal. Had Thomas fretted so badly over the stag that he'd frightened himself to death? Well, if that were true, what caused the pony to break free of its harness? Maybe it had been no ordinary stag. No one could say. More tragedy and mystery. A short time later, Emily gave birth to a healthy baby boy and called him Thomas, after his father. Emily, like many in St. Bride's, placed great faith in the church. She wanted to have her son properly christened as soon as possible. In those days, there were few clergy stationed along the coast. If she was going to have him blessed by a priest, she was going to have to take him to town. As soon as little Thomas was old enough to travel, Emily bundled him up for the journey. She was accompanied by Thomas's brother and a man who was boarding with them for the winter. The ground was still snow-covered, but they made good time crossing the country. They found the priest, and little Thomas was christened. It was the last time any of them were seen alive. The body of Emily and the baby were found on the road, not far from the clearing where Thomas had died. The baby was still cradled in Emily's arms, tucked deep into her chest as if she were protecting it. The bodies of the men were found a short distance away. All were warmly dressed, and there were no marks on their bodies. The only clue was their footprints in the snow. It looked as though the travelers had been walking, then suddenly began to run, scattering in all directions. Whatever had caused them to run left no trace in the snow, but those who had heard Thomas's story felt sure the black stag of St. Bride's had been there. and for all anyone knows, it may be there still in the forests along Placentia Bay. And there's some story notes. The Black Stag is one of the classic ghost stories of Newfoundland and Labrador. The oldest version I'm aware of appeared in the Newfoundland Quarterly in December 1910 and is credited to James McGraw of Cuslett. In the preamble to the tale, the Newfoundland Quarterly notes, Mr. McGraw has heard this story so often that he believes it, as do many other residents of the Cape Shore. I will point out the Newfoundland Quarterly was most likely published in St. John's, and at in that era especially, there would have been a significant degree of sneering at the opinions of baymen by townies, a practice that doesn't necessarily not exist today. In the 114 years since Mr. McGraw shared the tale, it has been told again and again. In my retelling, I stayed pretty faithful to the core facts of Mr. McGraw's version, but I allowed myself to have fun too, and imagine what it might be like to encounter a spectral caribou. Now there's a phrase you probably didn't expect to hear tonight, a spectral caribou, on a dark, snowy road. I think it's an experience I'd like to keep strictly imaginary. I think I'd have to agree with you, Mr. Hiscock. Sources and further reading. Black Stag, A Ghost Story, James McGraw, Newfoundland Quarterly, 1910. Story of the Black Stag, The Newland Magazine, Spring 65. St. Bride's, Decks Awash, May to June, 1990. Excuse me. The Black Stag of Distress, Offbeat Mystery of Newfoundland, Michael Harrington, 1988. The Black Stag from Ghost Stories of Newfoundland and Labrador, Edward Butts, 2010. So, initially, having read this, my first feeling was maybe he had some form of epileptic seizure or some hallucinatory experience. That said, having fired 3 shots at a caribou, and in my own experience, I've known caribou to bolt the moment they see a person. I've also known caribou to do hilariously smart things, like when someone puts, and this happened to one of my family members, they were standing in a open boat just offshore, saw the caribou on the beach, lifted the gun to fire. Of course, the wake of the boat came back up and kind of made them unsteady, so they put the gun down without firing a single shot, and the caribou fell over. They waited a few seconds, and of course the caribou jumped up and took off. Which I'm guessing is a strategy the caribou have evolved over time, and that's kind of freaky. The circumstances of this, it's difficult to know. The fact that there was nothing disturbing the snow at all, that's interesting. And I'm guessing that would probably have been the one of the details carried through the story over the years. So, my opinion? Well, I don't personally believe in ghosts generally, but that said, how does that Shakespearean quote go? There are more things in heaven and earth ratio than are dreamt of in your philosophy. One never knows. In any case, folks, I think I'm going to leave it there. I do appreciate all of you that have watched. When I post the video later, I will post it here on Rumble, and I will also be posting it to X and YouTube. Other than that, you can find me on Gab and GETTR besides. And there will also be an ad tacked onto the end of this. I do apologize, I haven't yet got my fourth wall stuff sorted completely out. I'm waiting for some samples so I can actually show it to you before I suggest that you buy it, which to me seems fair. Other than that, there probably won't be a video tomorrow, as I have finally decided that I need to make this studio room a little more comfortable, so I have to move some things around, rearrange a few things, set up some new equipment. Other than that, that's it for tonight, so I hope you're doing well. I hope you continue to do well. And as always, rise and rise again until lambs become lions. I will see you on Thursday. Bye-bye.
Hello, party people. So I'm attempting to make a go of this whole content creation thing, and I could really use your support, either monetary or, just moral. Though by moral I mean please like and share, comment, send it out to your friends, your frenemies, your family, and your foes. In any case, another way you can support me, and I am changing my merch store over to Fourth Wall, which is why it still says Redbubble in the bottom. You also have the option to send me a tip on Ko-Fi. But in the meantime, until I get the Fourth Wall up, sorted, ready to go, I will be keeping the Redbubble store open for a little while. Some of the designs that are in the Redbubble store will not be repeated on Fourth Wall. In fact, I am considering moving to a somewhat more limited run sort of system for some of these designs. Some of them cease to be topical after a while. I still have a number of the, let's call it the disease with no name designs. In any case, I do appreciate any support you guys give me, even if it is simply sharing it or even liking and commenting. Every comment I see, I will respond to. Other than that, as always, I hope you're well and continue to be well. Rise and rise again until lambs become lions. Bye-bye.